How do you react when challenges arise? I'm glad you're here for this conversation tonight. Hi, I'm Rob, and it's great to be able to catch up with you for a few moments here today. Let me mention our interactive teaching videos that are available for kids and families. You'll find links on Facebook, and as of this month, our posts have moved to YouTube. And so if you do a search on YouTube for Kingston Standard Church Cabin Kids, you'll find our channel as well as all of the weekly posts for kids and families. Our focus here in these videos is directly related to the themes and scriptures of our family videos. We know it can be hard to open faith conversations at home, and so we want to create an open door for dialogue in our homes and with people of all ages as we follow Jesus together. I'd invite you to connect with us online or in person if you're here in the Kingston area. There's a link in the description box that will take you directly to our website, and you can choose to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can like or follow us on Facebook. You can connect with us online by sending us a direct message either through Facebook Messenger or through the email address that's here on the screen. We'd love to hear how we can pray for you. If you have any questions or comments or any feedback that would be helpful for us as we continue to journey together walking with Jesus. Now, we asked the question this month, what do we do with the moments in life when we have to step up? We've looked at Joshua and Caleb and David. We're going to look at Daniel and Esther and how each of them trusted God and found courage to face difficult circumstances. God may also ask us to take a risk, to do something that we might not feel totally prepared to do. And God will give us the courage we need to face that challenge when we need it, as we choose to follow God even when we're afraid. So let's jump in to find out what we can discover today. Have you ever been outside, maybe on a hike or something, and had those little round burrs that stick to your socks and the laces of your shoes and maybe even your pant legs along the way? When I see those things, I think, man, what a nuisance. Why do these things even exist? But did you know that they were actually the inspiration for Velcro? In 1948, George DeMastro was walking through the woods, and he had the nuisance of these Klingons all over his clothes, and so as he was picking them off, he imagined a fastener to compete with the zipper. And Velcro has changed so many other situations since then, when somebody looked at a nuisance or a troubling situation differently. Now, we've all had moments where things have happened and maybe we've seen them as a nuisance or just a frustration in life. They're kind of, why did this even happen? Why are these things even here? But what does it take to see things differently? We've been checking in throughout this whole season on Abraham's family and some of their ups and downs. This week we're going to fast forward through a variety of situations all the way to an account about a man named Daniel. Now, Daniel's life fast forwards us all through the experiences with the kings in the Promised Land. And some of those kings were good, some of them were not so good. And some of them helped them trust God. Some of them made it difficult, maybe even impossible, to see God at work. At one point, the nation divided. They became a northern and a southern kingdom. It was like a family split between them. This continued to cause the people of Israel to spiral further and further away from faithfulness to God. So the book of Daniel kind of picks us up where the nation has now been conquered by a foreign power, and many of the people are being dragged off to another country. They had been in the habit of rejecting God for quite some time now, and so when it came to an attack, they discovered just how difficult it was for them to fight alone, because they'd made such a habit of pushing God away. So they were attacked and they were overtaken by the Babylonians. And it was not unusual for a conquering nation to take some of the brightest and the best back home with them. Daniel was among the nobility who was spared death, and he was brought to Babylon and tested to become a prospective advisor or worker for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And most figure when this happened, Daniel was probably 12 to 15 years of age when he landed in Babylon. And amazingly, the next several chapters of the book of Daniel take us on a highlight reel of his life. These are just a few of the incidents we know about, not only him surviving that exile and the departure to Babylon, but there was this issue when he landed in the new country. Daniel and a few of his friends worked out an arrangement to be able to eat according to the way God had wanted them to eat. And Daniel saw how God was with him in that. Later on, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he refused to tell anyone the nature of the dream, but he still expected a full interpretation. And so, because none of the wise men of the era could do that without hearing the dream, he threatened to kill them all. Well, Daniel prayed, and God revealed both the dream and the interpretation and saved the lives of all of the wise men in the kingdom, including himself. And he saw how God was with him. Then there was another dream that he ended up having to deliver some really tough news. I mean, Daniel was put in a position where he had to share with a powerful and compulsive leader that the man was going to lose his mind for a period of time. And it was always a toss-up as to how news like that would land with the kings of the day, whether or not you'd survive sharing that news. But Daniel saw that God was with him. Then the kingdom changes hands and there's a new king. And this is traditionally a time in this era when advisors from a previous king would all be wiped out. They'd be killed so that old loyalties and a potential uprising would be squashed right out of the gate. Daniel survived this transition and he saw how God was with him. Then with this new king, there was this moment where there was handwriting on the wall at a particular party, and Daniel was brought to the party to interpret what this meant. God had brought a message to this new king, and Daniel was the one who shared the grim message. And again, as I mentioned, it's always a toss-up when you share bad news with a king, how he was going to react. But he saw how God was with him. The kingdom was attacked and a new country took over. Now their new masters were the Persians. The war had changed the balance of power, and it was not uncommon again for advisors to be wiped out. Daniel survived, and he saw how God was with him. And when we live through moments like these, there can be this unknown that is a part of each one of them, right? It's kind of a nerve-wracking time. They challenge us, they stretch us. Sometimes they can be very frustrating. Sometimes we're wondering, why is it that I have to keep going through this? And it's easy for us to miss that these were actually building blocks in the life of Daniel. He was confronted again and again with the challenges of faith. Each step was kind of like a building block showing a different aspect of God's faithfulness. And we get to watch and see how God was with Daniel, and he experienced God's presence with him, so that when he needed to step up, he had a firm foothold on the faithfulness of God, a picture of the faithfulness of God from all of his experiences in life. Now, by chapter 6, Daniel is around 80 years of age. And he still emerged through all of this and through the kingdoms in conflict with the new master of the Persians in a place of honor. And that's where we pick up a familiar account in his life in Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. It says, "It pleased Darius, the Persian ruler of Babylon, to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss." Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps that by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we're never going to find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, the prefects, the satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now, this is such a backhanded workplace moment of treachery, isn't it? I mean, there's envy and jealousy that's a part of this, and they're using Daniel's healthy habits against him. What a pain. What a nuisance. Why would someone have to go through this? There's a friend of ours that says it so emphatically when something's not right. He says, "This is bad. This is really bad." And we've all heard what happens next. When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asked God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, the trap had been set. "Daniel, who is one of the exiles of Judah, he pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." Well, when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went back as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." Now, the cool thing about all of this in Daniel's life is he developed this pattern of experiencing the faithfulness of God, of looking at things differently. So in this moment when he needed to step up, what had happened was this track record of understanding of the faithfulness of God had really altered the way he saw the moment he was in. Now, for many of us, it's easy when we're in those kind of moments to focus on the bad things and to see how unfair this whole situation really is. But if that's what we focus on, we can miss the reality of God's presence and how tried and true his presence is with us. And we can look at a guy like Daniel and think, well, he must have been pretty special to have trusted God like that. I don't think I could have trusted God like he did. And it's common for us to look around and to wonder how maybe people like him have special powers or something to help them walk through difficult times so that they can step up in those moments. But we also can look at Daniel's situation and ask a healthy question: how does a person prepare to respond like this? I'd suggest to you there might be a couple of things that help us deal with moments like this, and you've probably experienced them too. It's not about positive thinking. It's not just about repeating a statement so that we'll remember God is with us, God is with us. But it really does start with a change of focus. And this is the response we see in Daniel. This is a God-grown, totally new approach to life, where the moments of his life had built up and added up to trust. Throughout this month, we have been looking at the backstory of how God took people through life events and built them up to be able to respond to the big moment that we get to see. And we understand this on so many other levels. We understand this when it comes to physical health, for instance. We know that if we neglect our physical health, then we'll struggle. But if we seek to grow our physical health, even then it takes 2 or 3 weeks for us to see the results of what we have been doing continue to help our endurance. On the other hand, I learned when my dad was in hospital a number of years ago that they suggested every day he was in a hospital bed, he would lose 3% of his muscle mass, which meant it only took 33 days for almost all of his muscle mass to be gone, just by laying around. We know that when it comes to money and to savings. If we're spending money and being charged interest, we know how that eats up more and more of our money. But when we're saving money and we're seeing interest compound in that way, boy, it's exciting to see how it builds and grows. And in the same way, God's school of discipleship has that building kind of block to it. It's a practical school of life and everyday situations, difficult times, sometimes frustrating situations, things that we encounter. They challenge our focus. They challenge our trust, because he's really about trying to retool our focus to trust him. So the question becomes, as we're walking through that, how are we seeing our reaction when the pressure is on? Do we focus on the situation, the panic, the outcome that we fear, or do we focus on him and on his tried and true presence? So with Daniel, because God was with him in all these other times in life, he had a ready-made case study for the faithfulness of God. He saw the picture of the faithfulness of God from so many different sides because of what he had experienced. It's like his focus had now changed to see the tried and true presence of God, in spite of how loudly this trap could have yelled for his attention and for him to panic. It's this kind of trust and how it builds in us that helps us to become stronger in that faith muscle, so that we reach out and it becomes more intuitive to trust God rather than to panic. We see the muscle growing, and God can be trusted with what I'm dealing with now because of how I've experienced him stretching me in so many other different situations in life. And when Daniel took an inventory of how God had been faithful, he knew he could trust God now in the same way he had before. But another side of this situation is that there was grace that God had given Daniel specifically for this situation that only he received. Because we've looked at people in challenges and situations, haven't we? And we've wondered, how is it that they do that? How is it that they're still standing? I really don't think I could do that. I don't know how I would respond in that situation. I've thought that when I've watched people deal with significant loss or illness or tragedy or some other situation in their life. I've been asked that too as I've walked through different scenarios in life. One of them was when we were sandwiched between aging parents and children at home and still needing to keep working through the whole situation. It's amazing how God gives grace in that story, in that part of the situation. But he doesn't give it to the people looking on. They get to watch as God takes care of people, but God gives the grace we need in that moment that supports us, that balances us, that helps us deal with the ebbs and flows in ways that we maybe can't even explain. We don't get it before we need it. We don't even get it leading into the situation. But if we step out in the moment, it's there. And there are times that I know that I can't even understand or sometimes explain how it is that we had the ability to step up in that moment. It's like there's this burst or surge of grace that somehow fills our lives in that moment where we're walking through as we step willingly into where God is taking us. And so it's partially true to say that we can't deal with the situation like they did because we don't need the grace for our situation like they did for theirs. We don't need the grace to address their story. We don't need the grace to walk through their story. We need the grace from God to deal with what we're walking through in our story. And many of us have experienced times in life where God's grace has carried us through. I've had many people share with me that in that moment, I don't know how we did what we did. But I know God provided the strength. I know He provided the wisdom. I know He provided the health that we needed to be able to respond and deal with what was unfolding. So in Daniel's case, he had not only focused on the history that he had with God and the grace for that particular moment, he'd also focused on the grace that had been given in that time to take the step up, to follow what God was asking him to do. Otherwise, it would be easy to miss because the moment screams and we'd miss God's presence that is so tried and true. Now, God's grace was carrying Daniel to step up, and Daniel knew God's trustworthy history because God had shown how He was with him. He'd seen a complete picture of so many different situations in his life. And we know how God worked with him in an amazing way in the continuation of this story. God took care of him in the lion's den, didn't He? Check this out in verse 17. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. And at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent His angel, and He shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in His sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in God. And at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For He is the living God, and He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and He saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So as we look at this encounter with Daniel, there's a few questions that kind of come to mind. Where have we experienced God's faithfulness in our lives to piece together the picture that He is painting for us of His faithfulness? How have we built that record of God's works of faithfulness in a way that continues to help us to step up when He calls us to? How could it change our response if we started to allow that to become our focus rather than the situation we find ourselves in? Because there's probably stories that you can look at in your own life and say, it wasn't such a big deal when I went through that, even though other people thought that was a big deal. But the strength you needed was present. And it's an opportunity to give credit to God for His grace in the midst of that moment, because God is giving you an opportunity to see in your own personal history how He is showing you His grace and building trust in your life, so that we'll continue to trust Him not only in the small moments, but in the big ones too. You know, a cool response to a thought like this could actually be to start journaling a list of experiences that we've had that show God's faithfulness. some of the small ones, some of the large ones, so that we can look at the history of how God has built faith and trust in the middle of difficult scenarios of our lives. Now, let me encourage you, if you're thinking about this, don't fall into the category of saying, well, yeah, I'll just think about that and I'll kind of develop a list in my mind. You know what? We'll all forget it too quick. Writing it down will take it to a brand new level. So if you're thinking about going this direction, don't try and just remember it. Seek to write it down so that it can make that kind of a difference. And if you're facing a tough time right now, it also raises some other kind of challenges and questions for us. Like, what have you noticed about how you're walking through this? And maybe have you not been aware of the grace that God is giving you to be able to walk well through this difficult time? Where have you noticed the grace of God as you step where He points you to step? And as you're allowing Him to focus you on His tried and true presence, how is that changing your response to what's happening? We can see how God's faithful history worked in Daniel. Sometimes it's harder for us to see it in our own lives, but let me assure you that God is still giving that same kind of grace today. And this is how we see the difficult moments of our lives differently as we trust God. And we can step up to do what we know we must do because we appreciate how God is with us. Let me pray for us today. Jesus, we're really grateful for the fact that you are with us. We thank you for the moments of our own personal history where you have shown us different sides and portions and views of your faithfulness. And when we put it all together, that picture shows us how we can trust you today, how it can change our responses to things that we may look at as a nuisance or things that we may look at as frustrating. And why is it that we're dealing with this? God, we thank you. We know that we can trust you in the way that Daniel did. We may not have exactly the same experience, and we may not have to have the same kind of grace that Daniel did, but we need the grace that you want to give us for what we're walking through right now. And I pray that you would continue to remind us, reveal to us how you're doing that. Show us that so we can, to your credit, continue to trust you more deeply as you build a history of faithfulness in our lives. We thank you and we praise you for your kindness, your graciousness, and your goodness to us today. Amen. Thanks for taking a few minutes to share this time together with us today. Again, let me invite you to connect with us either online or in person if you're here in the Kingston area. If you'd like to send us a direct message through Facebook Messenger, then feel free to do that, or you can use the email address that's on the screen. As I mentioned before, there is a link in the video description today to be able to take you to our website, and we would love to be able to hear from you and to share a variety of conversation with you as the days continue. If you would like, we'd encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel or to like or follow us on Facebook. And if you don't mind, before you go, take a minute just to like, comment, or share on this video. It's always an encouragement for us when you do. Farewell. We're praying for you, and we trust you're praying for us too, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.